Good afternoon, all. On behalf of IoT Academy, we welcome you all for the sixth session of National Level Faculty Refresher Program on Teaching, Learning, and Research in HEIs. Let me introduce the resource person of today's session, Dr. Neha Seth. Dr. Neha Seth is working as an assistant professor at School of Commerce and Management, Central University of Rajasthan, Rajasthan. She is a Ph.D. holder from the Department of Management Studies, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and postdoctoral from Faculty of Management, University of Delhi. She has written numerous research papers for national and international journals and has presented a number of papers in national and international conferences. She has delivered lectures in various academic programs at reputed institutions. She has also organized a number of events like national and international conferences, workshops, and guest lectures. We welcome you, ma'am, and with this, we hand over the session to Dr. Neha. Ma'am, please.
Thank you so much, Sher. Thank you so much, IoT Academy, for giving me this platform and the opportunity to share my views on the topic, that is writing effective PhD thesis. Are we expecting more participants to join?
Ma'am, they will be joining, ma'am. You can
Okay,
continue.
okay, fine. So we'll be talking about this title today, that will be writing effective PhD thesis. I would prefer to have the session as a dialogue rather than a monologue. So if you have any problem or anything, you may raise your hand and we may talk upon that particular issue at that point of time. Okay. So starting with the word thesis. Okay. Now, what do we mean by thesis? So basically, thesis is a kind of document. We have this perception that it is a book, but basically thesis is a document which is required in support of an academic degree or a professional certification that presents the author's research and results. So it is not only that this kind of document is required only for PhD, but for MPhil degree also, which is not anymore existing because of NEP 2020 implementation. Okay, so we don't have MPhil degree anymore, but for master's degree also, I'm sure there must be many who might have done their project work in master, who might be guiding number of students in their for their master's degree, wherein they have to work on a project and they have to submit a document which is a kind of mini thesis or a project report for evaluation and finalizing or completing their academic degree. So any document which is submitted from the candidate's point of view, wherein we have represented our research, our results, and this is submitted for the purpose of academic degree, for especially now for master's and PhD degree, that is our dissertation, or we call it thesis. So basically it is a document which is presented in the form of book. Like, it is a report basically, but it is presented in the form of book that is supported or that is submitted by a candidate for any professional qualification. So when we talk about thesis, so a thesis writing is regarded as one of the most important notion in expository writing. So wherein we have to give detail about what we have done, why we have done so, what are the results, what are its implications, what are the conclusions, how these results can be used for further scope, further researches. So when we are giving the details about all these things, we can present it in the form of a thesis. Now the thesis revolves around one single statement that we call a thesis statement. Now, a thesis statement emphasizes on the study's idea. Okay, so this one statement basically talks about the idea behind which that whole thesis is knitted and presented. It expresses the arguments or the views that crystallized into a single sentence. As I just mentioned, this statement is one statement around which our thesis revolves. Okay, this statement basically gives us the clear idea what our thesis is all about. Okay, what we are going to do in the thesis, why, what was the motivation behind choosing that particular topic, what is the scope of our thesis. Okay, because we cannot do anything and everything in one thesis. So there is a scope that is defined. Now, this statement gives us or helps us to keep our research area, to keep our topic manageable. We would able to do our work in a particular period of time, keeping it under a limited scope. Okay, so this statement is known as thesis statement, which is most important statement when we talk about any thesis. Okay, if I say it formally, so a thesis statement is one complete sentence that expresses researcher's position, where I am and where I ought to be, where I want to reach. Okay, so this statement fills that gap between where I am and where I want to reach as a researcher. It narrows the topic down to a specific focus of investigation. Okay, studying the economic condition. Okay, it is a vague statement, it's a general statement. Okay, but when I'm talking about studying the economic condition, what are the macroeconomic factors that I will be studying? What will be my scope? What will be my focus? Okay, this has to be cleared by using this thesis statement. It establishes the direction of entire thesis. I would rather be clear about where I have to move, in which direction I have to work. Okay, what kind of data I need, what kind of methodology I need to fulfill my objectives. It points out, or it point forward the conclusion. It takes us to the conclusion. After collecting data, using the methodology, doing the analysis, we can reach to some conclusion if our thesis statement is clear. It is always stated in our introduction chapter, because introduction chapter, we can say it is a like eye opener for our thesis, from where we actually begin. Okay, it should be created, this chapter should be created in such a manner that the reader should feel inside, reader should feel excited about reading our thesis. Okay, it always takes a stand and justify the further discussion as well. So it should be presented in such a manner that a further discussion may also takes place after, uh, when we have completely designed or expressed our thesis statement. There are few examples that I have mentioned here. So basically, thesis statement is not the statement of fact. Okay, so what it is? So we can understand with the help of example. Like the first example on the left hand side says that there are some negative and positive aspect of a banana herb tea supplement. We all know that there is a herb tea supplement which is available, and definitely some people may experience the positive implication of having this kind of supplement, and some may have some negative implication of this. So this is a general statement, maybe the statement of fact here we can say. Now, when we have to convert this in the form of a thesis statement, or I can say a problem statement, how should I actually present it? I should, rather putting it in the form of a statement of fact, I should put it in this way, like a because banana herb tea supplement purports rapid weight loss that results in loss of muscle and lean body mass. It possesses a potential danger to the customer. Now, the second statement, which I can say a arguable thesis statement, it initiates the argument. It gives us the direction. We can study the implications of herb tea consumption of herb tea supplement by considering that this might be the possible. It may lead to rapid weight loss. It may lead to loss of muscle. It may lead to loss of lean body mass as well, and it may have potential dangers to the customer as well. So by keeping this in mind, I know what my direction will be, how I have to study, to whom I need to contact. Everything opens up when my thesis statement is clear, right? Similarly, there is one more statement on the right hand side, which is mentioned, or which says that a foreign language is very common in movies. We all know this thing happens. The language, some disturbing language or language which might not be readily acceptable, are very common nowadays in movies. Okay, but again, this is a very clear cut statement. We cannot draw any conclusion, we cannot think of anything, that how and what, in what direction we have to move when we have to research in that area. But when I present it in the form of a thesis statement, or if I have to present the same statement which may initiate some kind of argument, I should rather present it in this way. Like, the amount of foreign language in movies is disproportionate to the amount of foreign language in the real life. Now, I have to check whether the language which is used in movies nowadays, is the same situation actually existing in the real world as well. So here I can compare the two situations, and here my research, or the work that I have to do for my thesis, will get the direction. So thesis statement is not just a statement of fact. Basically, it should be presented, or it is a statement which initiates the argument, which gives us the direction. Okay. So how we can present this thesis statement in a better manner? So a strong thesis, or a strong thesis statement should be presented in such that it's in a such a manner that it should answer a how and why about the topic through a specific language. Okay, this language is very important and it should answer that how I'm going to do that, whatever I am going to test, how I'm going to do that, and why. What is the motivation behind it? Why I'm going to do that? Okay, so a broad formula to think of a component of a weak thesis statement compared to the strong thesis statement is given as under. So there is a formula like in the upper part, the first part, this one, we can see that a broad noun, a weak verb, and a vague or evaluative adjective is used in this statement, which says that the economic situation is very bad. Again, this is a kind of statement of fact. The economic situation is bad. Okay, so this is very weak if I say this can be an appropriate thesis statement because it doesn't give us any direction. Rather, we can use a proper formula to formulate a thesis statement, and this statement can be rewritten using a specific noun wherein economic situation now as I mentioned that economic situation can be judged using various macroeconomic factors. Now it is somehow impossible to study all the economic factors in one thesis, so we have to define the scope. Now when I have to define the scope, now instead of using a common noun or a broad noun in the form of economic situation, I have used specific noun. Now, what I'm considering here, I'm considering the tax policies for understanding the further situation. So, economic situation, generalized word is replaced by specific noun, that is taxation policy or tax policies of current administration, current government's tax policies. Weak verb is replaced by action verb. Okay, now weak verb is, but action verb is threaten to reduce the tax burden on middle class. Now, threaten to reduce the current current taxation policies or taxation policies from the current administration is threatening to reduce the tax burden on the middle class. Now, this is the weak verb is replaced by the action verb. Now, and the vague or evaluative adjective is replaced by assertive predicate. That means bad is replaced by sacrificing education and healthcare programs for everyone. Now, first statement is economic situation is bad, which is replaced by the tax policy of current administration threatened to reduce the tax burden on the middle class by sacrificing education and healthcare programs for everyone. Now, from first statement, nothing was clear, but from second statement, everything is clear. Like we are going to study the taxation policy. We are going to study its impact on the middle class, in what direction we are going, what are other factors that is affecting the middle class, how it going to implement, what will be the implications of this particular study. Everything is clear when we are using this as a specific or a very clear cut thesis statement. So that is why, and that is how the thesis statement is very important when we are talking about writing a effective thesis. Okay, so this is the very first thing that should be very clear when we are talking about thesis writing. Now, when it comes to the writing, okay, so what we have to see, the very first thing comes to our mind is the book or the thesis. So what we have to see that it should be presented or given in such a way that the person should feel like picking it up and opening it. Okay, it happens in our day-to-day life as well. So whenever the food is presented in a very good manner in front of us, then only we feel like eating that food. So the very first thing is that our thesis should be presentable. Okay, so the initial pages should be drafted or presented in a very clear-cut, polished manner when we are talking about writing an effective thesis. So the very first thing that we have is our title page. Okay, so the title page is the first and foremost page of our thesis, of our document that we are presenting. So it should include the title of our thesis. Okay, the name of our department, the degree program, name of our university or institution. Okay, your name as a candidate, your enrollment number, the name of your supervisor, then the logo of your university should be there, And in some universities, the date of submission, if not specific date of submission, the month and year of submission is also mentioned on the title page. Now it depends on the policies of your universities. They will give you the standard format of the title page that you need to use while submitting your thesis or while presenting your thesis. The next thing, once you open this, there are a few certificates that you mentioned wherein you state or you basically sign this certificate wherein you will mention that this is your original work and you have not copied this work from anywhere else, and at the same time you are not submitting the same work to for any other award of any other degree. And this has to be signed by the candidate as well as the supervisor, so both of them will take the responsibility that this is the original work and is also not submitted anywhere else. Okay, post that we generally put our acknowledgements. Okay, so in acknowledgement, again, it depends on person to person. We generally consider this as an optional thing. Okay, so if you want to include it, that is fine. If you don't want to include it, that is fine. And the purpose behind this is to express our gratitude, our thankfulness to those who helped us in finishing our thesis work in any which ways. Sometimes it happened, people started from thanking their supervisor, and they can even go to thanking to the library staff, to the supporting staff which are there in the department, to their friends and colleagues who have helped them. Everyone is thanked in this acknowledgement. And sometimes it happens it is just a half a page acknowledgement wherein we thank only important people who have contributed directly to our dissertation. Okay, so it depends on person to person that what all they want to include when we talk about writing acknowledgements. Okay, moving ahead, the next thing that we need to include is the abstract. So basically, abstract is like a trailer to the complete movie. Okay, it is like a summary that reflects what is our thesis all about, what is our work all about. Okay, it generally, you can see, it is defining the thesis, so cannot be summarized like the abstract of a research paper, maybe in 100 or 200 words. You may use maybe 1 page, 1.5 page, or maximum 2 pages to define that what your work is all about. It may include a brief introduction, your objectives, the methodology that you have used, the data that you have used, what are the results, what are the conclusion. And if space is there, you may also include the implication. So it has to be really, really brief. Okay. The we need to give this because sometimes what happens, if you are sending your thesis for evaluation to any evaluator, okay, what happens from the office is the whole thesis, the soft copy of the thesis doesn't go for examination. First of all, we send the abstract to the evaluators. They read the abstract. If they find it interesting, or if they find the area is relatable to their area of expertise, then only they accept your thesis for evaluation. So that abstract should be drafted in such a manner that it should create interest in the mind of reader, and they should be eager to read the whole of your book, whole of your work. So they should easily agree to accept the work for evaluation as well. Okay, so that is why this abstract thing is very important when we are writing the thesis. Once the abstract thing is done, the next thing is table of content. Okay, so table of content is a simple index. Okay, it is listing of all our chapters, the headings, the subheadings, and everything with the page number. Okay, so whenever we are writing the chapters, we are putting the page numbers in the end, and this is what we have to present in our table of content or the index. Okay, so that when the reader is reading the book, so wheresoever he or she want to reach, he can easily find out the topic, that this topic is available on this page, and he or she can easily go to that particular page to look into that particular topic. And post that, after you have done with your this your table of content, the next thing that you have to give is your list of tables and figures. Okay, there are definitely, there must be theses when where we don't have to use tables and figures, but sometimes what happens, we need to add some tables and figures just to have a better idea or better presentation of our results. Okay, so a table can be given in beginning. which may also state the title, or an index kind of thing is given in the beginning. That is a list of tables and figure, wherein the title of the tables and figures and the page number on which these tables and figures are presented. Okay. After tables and figures, the next thing that we can have is abbreviation list. Okay, sometimes what happen, we are using some abbreviations, like in my case, if I'm working on, say, stock markets. Okay, so BSc, NSc. Okay, these kind of terms are very commonly used in my thesis, okay, or in my research papers. Now, sometimes what happens, the person who is reading might not be aware of these terms, or might not be aware of these short forms that I'm using. So just to have that clear idea so that everyone can easily understand, okay, I should mention the list of abbreviations. So the whatever abbreviations I'm using in the thesis, this should be presented in the form of list in the beginning of your thesis. Okay, so it is always helpful for the reader to easily refer to the pages and interpret the exact meaning of the abbreviations that you are using. Okay, the last but not the least thing is glossary. Okay, glossary is like now what happens, sometimes we are using such terms in our dissertation. Okay, it may be possible and we expect our reader to understand each and everything, but we should not do that. We cannot always expect our readers to carry the expertise to understand this highly specialized or maybe sophisticated or technical term, okay, what we are using in our thesis. So it is better to give the brief idea of whatever term which might not be the regular or general terms in the beginning, by giving small definition of these terms so that the reader can easily relate or easily understand that what we want to say. Okay. Okay, so once we are done with these initial pages, okay, the next thing is we need to give, or we need to write, or we need to start the chapters. And the very first chapter that is available in any thesis, or once we open this, is our introduction chapter. Okay, so in this portion of our thesis, the introduction chapter, we try to give, or we try to introduce the reader to the topic. Okay, the topic of our research, its relevance, its purpose, its motivation, why we are doing this work. Okay, because it provides the brief insight to the reader that what and why we are doing this. Okay, so this introduction chapter should be framed in such a manner that it should establish our topic of research. It provides the clear cut background of the topic that we are using for our research, or on which we are doing our research work. It should be presented in such a manner that it should focus, as well as it should clearly define the scope of our research. Okay, and the relevance of our work should also be mentioned, the research questions and the objectives. Now, sometimes what happen, people can put these research questions and objectives in the end as well. Okay, in the chapter of methodology, the methodology chapter also states these research questions and objectives, because these are based on the hypothesis. So it is okay if you are mentioning this in your introduction chapter. It is also okay that if you are mentioning your research questions and objectives in your research methodology chapter. So it is perfectly fine. And the last thing that we do in our introduction chapter is we are also providing the overview of our thesis in this chapter. Like the topic, the heading that we give to this particular topic is chapterization, wherein we state that what is our first chapter about, second, third, fourth, fifth, or whatever chapters you are having in your thesis, what these chapters are talking about. Okay, once you are done with this first introduction chapter, the second thing that we need to do while writing the thesis, though according to me this should be the first thing when we are doing the research, because then only we will get to know that what is the actual situation of the research and what is the gap, so that we can fulfill that gap to give the or to work on the current situation. Okay, so practically this is the first thing that we have to do. But when we have to present it, we present introduction first, and then we present the literature review thing. Now, why we are doing this literature review? We are doing this to gather and assimilate the sources. Okay. And picking up the most pertinent researches that are already existing. So when we're talking about literature review, we are reviewing the literature that is already existing in that particular area. Okay. Now we are doing this for critically analyzing and interpreting each source. So we are using each research paper or article that whatever from whatever source we have collected this. Now we are reviewing, we are studying these papers to have a clear cut idea of what is happening in that particular topic and what particular area of research. And this is done to draw the point of connection between them, that we call gap in the research. Okay, what is the current situation and what is missing? Now, to fulfill that missing thing, okay, we are doing this literature review. Now, the purpose behind this, ultimate purpose behind doing the literature review, to address the gap in the concerned literature. So, after studying the research papers related to our research topic, we'll get to know that what is missing, what is where this particular topic is lagging in terms of research. And this gives us the objectives of our study. Okay, this gaps gives us the objective of study, what we should do. This will define, or this will gives us the direction for our study, right? Now, once we are done with the literature review thing, the next thing that we need to do is we have to write our next chapter, that is our research methodology chapter. Okay. Now, as the title of this chapter says, research methodology. So clearly in this chapter, we have to define that what methodology we have. Now we have a clear cut idea about what is the gap, out of which we have drawn the objectives also. We have drafted our hypothesis based on that. We have drafted our assumptions based on that. Right. Now, how to fulfill these assumptions, or how to fulfill or complete or attain these objectives, this chapter will define. Okay, the research methodology chapter. So this chapter includes it is an overall type and approach of the research. Basically, this chapter defines what kind of research you are doing. Is it a quantitative research or a qualitative research, or it is just an experiment? Okay, so this chapter will define what kind of research are you doing, what would be your methods that you are using for data collection, whether you are using, I'm talking in context of social science researches majorly, so whether it is a survey method or an interview method, or you are just using the existing things like archives for studying this. Okay, for collecting the data. So what method you are using for data collection is also mentioned in this particular chapter. Then it also includes the elaborative details of when, where, with whom the ground research took place. Okay. Now, suppose you have collected the data, then who will be your respondents? To whom you have collected? How many will be your respondent? What are their areas of existence? Maybe in terms of their working profile, maybe in terms of their geographical existence. So at every point you have to be very clear in terms of scope of research, to what extent you are going. Everything has to be mentioned in this chapter. Okay, then the methods of analyzing the data. So far you have mentioned about the data, how, from where, and everything your data is collected. The next thing is to analyze the data. Now for data analysis, again, what tools, how you are analyzing the data, what kind of analysis will you be using, that should be very much clear. Okay, is it just a statistical analysis or some basic analysis, or it will be a time series analysis? So what analysis you will be using, it should be mentioned in this chapter, and the tools that are required or that you have used for the purpose of analysis. Okay, like what softwares you are using. I'm sure if there are people from social science background, they're aware of SPSS, and if there are people who are using time series analysis, they might be aware of Strata or eViews. And nowadays R as a software is very famous amongst the people who are especially using time series analysis. So what tools, what programs, what softwares you are using for data analysis should also be clearly mentioned, and not just like you're mentioning SPSS, you are mentioning eViews. The version of the software that you are using should also be clear. Like if you're using eViews 10, so I have started using eViews when eViews 5 version was available. Nowadays 10, 11 is available. My scholars are using these latest versions. So what version of software you are using should also be mentioned in this chapter, and a clear cut justification of the methods that you are using. It is not just that I'm using this method. Now, why you are using this method? Okay, why this particular method is right fit for your analysis? That why answer should also be mentioned in this chapter. This chapter should be like a clear cut view of what is going to happen after this. Okay, so once we are done with this literature, research methodology chapter, the next thing is, yeah, you will use your data, you will do the analysis, and you are going to present your results in this chapter. That will be fourth chapter. Uh, and the title can be results, can be the results after data analysis. The title can be data analysis, or whatever you can fix the title as per the discussion with your supervisor. So basically, in this chapter, you have to present the results of analysis that you have done using the tools and data that you have mentioned in research methodology chapter. Now, concisely stating that every relevant outcome, including the relevant descriptive statistics also. Basically, this defines the characteristics of the data, the descriptive statistics. Right from the characteristics of the data to the inferior statistics, like what test you are using, what test statistics you are using, what values you are getting, what kind of tables you are getting, everything should be mentioned in this particular chapter. Okay. So basically, when we are talking again about social science researches, we can use various tables to present these results. Okay. When we are running the test, there are a number of tables that we are getting. Sometimes what happens, the tables or the results that we are getting, there are too much in detail. Now, giving every information is not possible in the chapter. So we can pick the relevant information from the table and we can present it in this chapter as per our need. Alternatively, what happens, sometimes these detailed results are may be required. Okay, what we can do, this details chapter can be taken in the end of the thesis in the form of annexures. Okay, so it's better to present a very neat, clear cut information in this chapter, but the detailed results can be presented in the form of annexure in the end of the thesis. So not just this, this chapter, it also state a brief order how the results are associated to the findings of the questions. Okay, we have framed the research question, we have framed the hypothesis. Okay, we have proposed few assumptions in the form of hypothesis. Now the results will tell us whether we are accepting the hypothesis or we are rejecting the hypothesis. Now, what will be the answer of the research questions that were that arised from the objectives? Okay, so this particular chapter will clearly show the answers of the research questions as well. And we have to mention the figures, tables, in case they can help the reader to understand the results in the better sense. As I just mentioned, if only picking the information is helpful just for us, then it is not the right way of presenting. We have to present the tables and figures in such a manner, keeping the reader of the thesis in mind. Whether if the person who is reading our thesis, and if he or she doesn't belong to exactly the same area where we are, so whether he or she will be able to understand it clearly or not, we have to keep that you attitude in mind. We have to keep the reader's point of view in mind while presenting our results as well. Okay, then reporting all the results that are pertinent to our research question. So we have to give all the figures, all the tables, all the values that can clearly justify our research questions. And it will never include subjective speculation and interpretation. So anything that is speculative in nature, or you're not clear about this, or you're not getting the clear cut results, should not be mentioned in this chapter. Okay, so once we are done with this results chapter, this is just a results chapter where you're presenting the results. You're not giving the interpretation of the results. Okay, we are just stating whether the hypothesis is accepted based on the p values that we are getting from the analysis. But the interpretation, the meaning of this accepting hypothesis or rejecting hypothesis, the clear cut interpretation should be given in next chapter, which will be your discussion or interpretation chapter. It can be written as a summary, conclusion, and future scope of research, or summary, interpretation, or maybe future scope of research. So again, depending upon how you are doing it, you can make it maybe one, maybe can be done in one chapter or can be segregated in two chapters. Like in one chapter you can give discussion and interpretation, in another chapter you may give limitations and future scope of research. Okay, so the most important now is this thing, where the discussion and interpretation is relevant, or we have to talk about the discussion and interpretation thing in this chapter after we have presented our results. Okay, now there are three most important things in this chapter. One, providing our interpretations. Now, what do the concerned results mean? We have given the value, p-value is this, that is why we are accepting the hypothesis. P-value is this, that is why we have rejected. Now, what do we mean by accepting and rejecting the hypothesis? Okay, here we have to mention this very clearly. Okay, the second thing is exploring the implications. We have to check that if this is the result, what is the implication of that result? Why and for whom the concerned results really matters? Who are the actual beneficiaries of our research? Who all the stakeholders of our research work? Who all can actually use this research work for their own various reasons? Okay, so here we have to mention the implications of the interpretation of research as well. And also we can acknowledge the limitations of our research work. So no research works is free from limitations. So those who are saying that my research work doesn't have any implication, so I'm really sorry, this is not possible. Every research work has some or more than one limitations. Okay, now in this chapter we have to mention the limitations of our research work. Now, what is that for which or from which our results are derived and deprived of? Something that we cannot tell in this piece of research, or something that we may considering maybe for future scope of research. So since we are defining the scope, there is a limitation also, something which falls beyond the scope of this piece of research, which will make our future scope of research. So we have to mention the limitations also in this particular chapter. And the last chapter after this, or maybe it can be merged with the previous chapter as well, will be our conclusion chapter. Okay, those who are into writing research papers as well, they might have received the comments from the reviewers. This is a very general comment that we generally get from the reviewers, that conclusion part is not very strong, or maybe the introduction part is not very strong. These two things are very important. First, introduction, I have mentioned that because it opens up the minds of the reader. It creates the interest in the mind of the reader, whether they want to continue or not. And conclusion, because it is the answer to the key research questions. For now, till now, if you are able to engage your reader, so this is the final concluding part. Okay, whenever we are seeing any movie also, if the conclusion, if the end is very good, we comes out of the hall very happily. If the end is not very good, we comes out of the hall, the movie hall, in not a very good mood. So it is like showing a movie to somebody only. So how you are presenting your conclusion will set the mood of the reader as well. Okay, so we should present our conclusion in a really, really good manner. Okay, so the conclusion is to be concisely answer the key research question. So it should be presented in such a manner that when we have quoted our research questions, whether our results and our interpretations are able to answer our research questions or not. Okay, we should clearly give answers to our research questions in this particular topic. Okay, now this form of conclusion sometimes also incorporates the recommendation for the future scope of research. So in this chapter, we have given the conclusion. Okay, we have given the answers to the research questions. This opens up the future scope of the doors for the future scope of research as well. So here in this chapter, we can also manage that this is what we have done and this can be done in future. Okay, so in this segment of the thesis, the conclusion chapter, it is significant to leave the reader with the crystal clear impression of why the research matters, why your research was important. Okay, so in this chapter, the conclusion should be really, really concrete in nature, should be very clear. Okay, sometimes what happens because of lack of time, the person who is reviewing your thesis or maybe your research paper, they uh, they jump to the conclusion chapter directly to see that what has done and what are the results. Okay, so make sure that this particular chapter is also very concrete, very crystal clear. It should give very good impression in the mind of reader for your benefit only. Now what as researcher we have to contribute it to what has been already done. So now you have or what is already known. So as a researcher, what was your contribution to study? Now here comes the answer to the gap in the literature review, the gap that we have found. Now how you are fulfilling that gap. In this chapter you will give this clear cut idea that there we were, here we are now. So this is how we have filled the gap in existing literature. Okay, now once you are done with this chapters, various chapters in your thesis, the next thing are ending pages. Like we have beginning pages, we have like ending pages as well, wherein we include one reference list, a few appendices, and one thing that we should not forget, a proper editing and proofreading of our thesis. Okay, when we talk about reference list, now there is a particular format that we need to follow. That format is given maybe in your university ordinance or maybe in your brochure or whatever document that you are getting, that how you have to put your reference list. This is also sometimes a reason I have seen people who have received their thesis for review because the reference list is not correct. Okay, so whatever references you are using, whatever content you are referring to while doing your thesis work, you should put this in the reference list. Okay, whatever name you are using in your thesis should be there, definitely there in your reference list. And the way, the style of reference list should match with the criteria that is given by your university. It may be presented in APA style, it may be presented in Harvard style. So even while submitting our paper, there are different publication houses that are using different styles of references. Okay, how the references should be written. So make yourself sure about the kind or the style that you need to use for your reference list. Use that particular style for putting or quoting the references that you have used in reference list. Now I've mentioned earlier also in while I was talking about the results chapter. Now sometimes it's because of maybe limitation of space, or maybe in order to present a clear picture there in that chapter, we are not able to put the detailed results in those chapters. Okay, which should be presented in such a manner that reader should get the idea. But sometimes what happen, readers want to get the detailed idea of the results as well. Now the detailed results which cannot be presented in those chapters can be given in appendices. Now what happens, sometimes appendices includes those information or those pieces of information which might not be directly related to your research, but it is something that cannot be missed. Okay, if somebody wants to refer to these appendices, so the tables or the figures or whatever required should be clearly available to the reader, and he or she can come and refer to that appendices to have the clear cut idea. Now here your thesis end with your appendices. Okay, but it is not that what we have written for the first time can be binded in the form of book and we can be submitted. We have to go for the proofreading of our thesis. Okay, we ourselves as a candidate should read our thesis multiple times to find out the mistakes. Now when we are reading the thesis multiple times, what happens, this is generally happen with most of us, when we are reading the same thing again and again, we tend to skip some errors which are there because we are seeing the same thing. So take help maybe from your friends, from your teachers, definitely your supervisor is there, or somebody, there are professional proofreaders are also available. Sometimes we may take help from them as well for proofreading of our thesis. They can point out and they can pick if there are errors, not just the typo errors. Okay, there may be error in the term of, like, maybe grammatical errors are there. Okay, maybe the formation or formatting errors are there. Okay, what should be placed first and what should be placed in the end? These kind of corrections might also be there. So go for proofreading of your thesis multiple times, edit it for as many times it requires. Try to present a thesis which is free of all kind of errors. Okay, so go for this repeated cycles of editing and proofreading before finally binding that thesis, the piece of work. So this is a kind of flow chart which shows that how we can write our thesis. So as I have already mentioned these things, the title page, abstract, table of content, acknowledgement, results, methodology, etc. Okay, so the same thing we have already discussed, which is presented in the form of a flow chart here. Okay, now there are few don'ts and do's, or we can say these are a few thumb rules that we need to follow when we are writing a thesis. Okay, so first we will discuss don'ts and then I will go to what we should do while writing the thesis. So these are clear cut no when we are writing our thesis. Like, the don'ts: don't use first person. Okay, the very first thing is we should not use first person in writing a thesis. But now the trend is a bit changing. At least not in thesis, but in our research papers, we have seen that people are writing, if he is a single person, I have done this, or I have drawn the conclusion, or we have done this. But again, it is a general thing that we should not use the word like I, we, me, us, my, our, or maybe you in our thesis. So it should not be written in the first person pronoun, but a third person should be used while writing a thesis. Like, the author stated this, the authors reached to the conclusion, or the researcher concluded this, like that. Okay, these words can be used, or should be used rather, while writing the thesis. Now, we should not use some archaic terms like thus, alas. There are better and presentable words are there, like therefore, okay, and however, instead of using but. So we should know, we should use a professional English rather than a common or a casual English while writing our thesis. So we should not use these kind of terms. We should also not use slangs. Okay, when I say slang means these are the short words or the common words which we use while talking, while we are not in professional relation, or when we are not talking professionally to somebody. These are the part of casual writing, like using DIY. We all know the meaning of DIY is do it yourself, but we cannot use these small words or terms while writing our thesis. So when I'm talking about slang, we should not use those words which shows that we are using the casual writing. Okay, we should present it in such a way that we can use it in the form of academic writing, right? Then we should not use glitches. Okay, now we need to be very careful when we are using glitches. Glitches are the words like short but sweet, last but not the least, it's easier than it said, or on top of the word, in the nick of time. These are the statements which are cliches, but it should not be used in thesis. We might be used while we are talking to each other, but when we are talking about academic writing, something you are putting in writing, okay, it should not be used. The cliches should not be used. Okay, because it is considered vague. It is not acceptable. It is not, gives good impression in the mind of readers. So we should avoid using glitches. We should not use the qualifiers, like the terms like rarely, surely, often, hopefully, basically. These are again the terms which are common English terms. Okay, we should not use these things. Okay, we should also avoid the phases like in this paper or in this thesis I will, in the conclusion this. try to avoid or try to at least repetitive use of these kind of sentences. So every time you cannot use, after every chapter you cannot use in conclusion. Okay, because only conclusion chapter will conclude the thesis. So avoid using repetitive or repetition of these kind of phases. Okay, so these are the don'ts that we need to consider or keep in mind when we are writing the thesis, but there are do's also. Okay, these are the things we should keep in our mind. This should be done when we are writing the thesis. Like, we need to write in a clear or a plain style. We should avoid flowery or very decorative language at all the cost. Okay, because we are talking about academic writing. Okay, we are not writing the dialogues for any movie that should be like, create some kind of impression on somebody. So we should be simple, we should be plain. Okay, the purpose behind writing a thesis to make the impact in the mind of reader, that the person should understand what we are trying to express. This should be the main target of writing it. So forget, throw your dictionary, write whatever is coming in your mind first. Okay, the other advantage of doing this is you can avoid the case of plagiarism, because you're not copying anybody's style. Okay, you're not, writing as anybody else is writing his or her work. So when you are using your own words, your own thoughts while writing your, whatever is there in your mind, you can avoid the case of plagiarism, which is very prominent nowadays. We have to be very, very careful when we are writing. We should use active voice when we are writing. Okay, we should not use passive voice while writing. Then we need to vary our sentence structures. Okay, sometimes what happen, reader gets tired when they read a series of lengthy statements, okay, with multiple clauses. So avoid writing very lengthy statements. Okay, so better use some series of short statements. So as much as possible, vary the length of construction. So sometimes you can use large statements and sometimes it's better to use short statements. So depending upon need, depending upon the thought that you are expressing, choose the length of sentence as well. Okay, then use the consistent tense. Okay, so it's better to write your thesis in present tense. This is the most common tense that is used while writing your in academic writing, whether you are writing your thesis or you are writing your academic paper. Future tense is not used at all. Okay, so it should be avoided at whatever cost. And past tense is generally used for some kind of historic work, okay, which has already happened, or some kind of experiment that was done in past and now you are just jotting it down. Okay, so it's better to focus on present tense when we are doing our writing work. Now the last thing is, have someone else read your thesis before you turn it in, before you submit your thesis. I've mentioned earlier also, try to get input from somebody who is not from the same area, or who is not having the idea of your work, because he or she will read the thesis from a layman's point of view, and you can incorporate the comments from such person in making your thesis very good piece of work, so that every reader can easily understand what you want to express. Okay, so these are the points that we need to keep in our mind positively while writing the thesis. Okay, so this is all about thesis writing from my side. If you have any questions, the platform is all open.
The session is open for discussion now. You can unmute and interact with the resource person, or you can post your questions in the chat box also. Ma'am is there to help you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. And moreover, if somebody is willing to submit the thesis, which are already awarded under my supervision as well, then I can share, or I can show the glimpse of the thesis, how we can write the thesis. Okay. So here I would like to show that how the thesis can be presented. Is the screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So This was a thesis submitted by one of my scholar. He is now appointed working with a prestigious university. So as I mentioned, this is the title page or the very first page of the thesis, which includes the title of the thesis. Okay, submitted for doctoral of philosophy. That means for PhD, he has submitted the thesis in commerce in the area. This is the name of my scholar. This is the university logo, department, my university, and when he has submitted the thesis. Okay. Again, this was optional. This was his wish to mention this. This is the declaration that I talked about. That this is his own work. He has not copied this work. See, it's a record of my own work carried out during the time period for which he has worked under my supervision. Okay, and the matter of this thesis is not submitted for award of any other degree or any other institute. So he has not submitted this piece of work anywhere else. He has signed this, and I have also acknowledged this, okay, as a supervisor. Then he has given his acknowledgements. So he has thanked lot many people who have contributed to his research work. Then this is the abstract. Okay, so this is the, see, it's a one-page abstract wherein he has briefly talked about what work has been done in the thesis. There are a few keywords also that he has included. Then this is the table of content, as I mentioned, the index thing with the chapters, the topics, the headings, subheadings, and the page numbers on which page this particular topic is presented. Okay. Then the list of table is there. Okay. So whatever tables on whatever page he has presented, he has mentioned this as a list of tables. List of figures are also there. So he has used 11 figures in this particular thesis and the page number on which these figures are presented. These are the various abbreviations that are used in the whole thesis. Again, he has worked specifically in the area of stock markets, and to be particular, he has worked on contagion thing. So sometimes what happens, the thesis might go to some person who might be expert, who has the expertise in finance, but not the exact expertise in stock markets. Or maybe he has the idea of stock market, but not the exact knowledge of contagion or integration thing. Okay, so these kind of things will help them to understand the terms or the short forms that we have used in the thesis. Now, this is the first chapter which talked about the introduction thing. Now, introduction include everything, scope, motivation, and everything. And as I mentioned in the last, we mentioned about the chapters, the structure of the thesis. What is our first chapter about, the second chapter, third, fourth, and fifth chapter, and conclusion of the chapter. The second chapter is of review of literature, where we have reviewed number of papers. So this student of mine have reviewed approximately 150 papers to come to the conclusion or the gap in the research, that what should be his objectives for this particular study. Now, the papers have been gathered from various countries, from various authors, okay, from various years, okay, spread from the various years. And this chapter gives the wide idea about the review that we have done, and we have reached to the gap after doing this work. So the conclusion states the gap in the research. So he has analyzed 170 studies for this particular chapter. Now, the third chapter talks about the research methodology. As I've mentioned while showing you the PPTs, that this chapter gives the conceptual framework of what we have done and now how we are going to do. Okay, what we need to do and how we are going to do. So this chapter talks about the research questions, the objectives, hypothesis, and what would be our design, what would be our data. So for this thesis, these are the data because these are the markets that we have considered for the study. What are the techniques, tools that we are using? So this person has used software for the purpose of analysis, and these are the tests: multivariate model, Karch model. So these are the various models that were used in this thesis for the purpose of analysis. So this was our research methodology chapter. Now the fourth chapter is analysis and interpretation. Here we have merged these two chapters. Okay, one was data analysis and interpretation. So we have presented the analysis thing in the form of tables, and we have also done the interpretation thing, that what do these figures mean? Okay, so what are the values, p values, etc.? What are the values that we are getting, and what are the meanings of those values that we are getting are presented in this particular chapter. Okay. So this was our data analysis and interpretation chapter. And once we are done with our data analysis and interpretation chapter, the last chapter that we have given in the thesis was conclusion. I'm coming to the conclusion chapter also. So this is summary, conclusion, and suggestion thing. Okay, this is the last chapter. So we have summarized the thesis. As I mentioned, sometime what happened, the reviewer can go to the last chapter directly. Okay, now here we have given the summary that what we have done in the thesis. So by reading this chapter only, he will get the complete idea of what is there in the thesis. Okay, so summary, what are the main findings of the thesis? Now, the clear-cut answer to the research questions. Now, these were the research questions. Is contagion spillover among the international stock market significant during the peak crisis period or not? The answer is clear-cut yes. Okay, the interpretation is given in the previous chapter. The answer is given in this chapter. Similarly, there are more research questions which are there in the thesis, and the answers are given, and also the hypothesis associated with that particular research question is accepted or rejected is mentioned in this particular part of this chapter. What are the implications of the findings? Who all can be the stakeholders and how they can use our study is mentioned in this part. Then the limitations of the study. Okay, so what are the limitations of the study is mentioned, and based on the limitation, what was not done so far can be done in future. So the scope of future research is also there. References thing. So in Central University of Rajasthan, we use APA format. Now we are using APA format of all the articles or research papers or blogs or books or theses or whatever we are referring. These are mentioned in this list of references. Every piece of paper, piece of information that we have referred is mentioned here. Okay. And the appendices. Okay. As I've mentioned, sometimes the tables are so lengthy, or we feel that these are not relevant for any conclusion. Like this is the paper, or this is the table that gives us the idea about review of literature. So this is not relevant to give such a lengthy table. You can see this is a table of about 12 to 15 pages. So there is no point of mentioning this table in the chapter. So we have mentioned this here in the appendices. Okay. And in last, we have mentioned the publications that aroused or that were taken from the thesis. Okay, so these were the publications that we have published from the thesis and the conferences this scholar has attended during his research work under my supervision. So this is a complete piece of thesis uh, which was done in Central University of Rajasthan. So if you have any more questions or anything you want to discuss, you are most welcome.
Dear participants, do you have any queries? You can post it in the chat box also.
Thank you. Okay. So there is a hand raise from principal's office.
Sir, do you have any queries, sir? You have raised your hand.
Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am.
Very good afternoon.
Actually, like mid of this presentation, I joined, so some of the valuable part I missed out.
Okay.
So whatever time I have spent in this presentation, I have one doubt regarding the thing is that while some universities they are asking for the PhD, they are conducting a viva.
Okay.
So while we are going for viva, they are asking to present a thesis. I mean, it's a sample thesis on which project you are going to do this PhD.
This is for admission purpose only, sir?
Yeah. My query is like while we are going for a viva,
There are
the top.
two things. Whether you are giving presentation for admission to PhD program,
Yes,
or you are
correct.
completing your PhD program and then you have
No,
to present your
for
thesis.
admission into PhD program.
Okay. Then there you have to present a kind of synopsis or
Yes.
the topic on which you want to do your PhD. Okay.
Yes, correct. So
Okay.
we are going to present a synopsis. So if that topic is not accepted by the supervisor, so
Mhm.
is it the point that means I will be rejected or anything else, or before choosing the topic we have to consult the supervisor earlier, because that is the confusion. I have attended 2 3 vivas and I am not getting clear whether my topic is getting selected by the supervisor or I am getting rejected at the viva
Yes.
point of view.
So, sir, it's been almost 8 years. I'm sitting in the interview for selecting the candidates for PhD in my university.
Okay,
So, the topic that you are presenting for PhD admission is never a criteria for selecting the candidate for a PhD course or not.
okay,
Okay.
okay,
The topic is never a criteria. The points that we keep in our mind is first, the person is acceptable to learn new things. He or she is open to learn new things or not. Sometimes what happens, the thesis that I have shown you, this boy has joined the university in 2015 for 2014 for PhD, and he is a absolute fresher. He just completed his MCom
okay,
in year 2014.
okay,
He has a vague idea of research when he came to the university, and he just talked about the project that he has done during his MCom. But the
okay,
only thing that we have picked up at that time, that he is keen to do his work. He is the one who is very dedicated for the work. He
okay,
is open to learn new things. And as a result, sir, he has submitted his thesis in just 4 years.
okay,
Okay. And he came out with very good publications that are there in Scopus and Web of Science journals out of his thesis.
okay, okay,
Other candidates of mine as well. There is a girl who is right now working with me. Okay, one of
okay,
my scholar. Again,
okay,
he was also a kind of fresher. She
okay,
presented a topic related to green bonds.
okay,
So,
okay,
though that topic was good, I just asked one question to her, that if you will be selected, are you willing to change your topic? And she said, yes, ma'am. If somebody can guide me in this direction, I will definitely like to change my thesis. And to my surprise, this is she has completed 2 years of her thesis, and she has 3 Scopus papers, more than 10 conferences in IITs and IIMs, and there
okay,
are already 4 papers which are submitted and under review with Scopus and Web of Science journals. And her
okay,
thesis work is almost in her hand. She is ready to submit in another 6 to 8 months, but the university will allow her to submit only after completing 3 years. So that is our limitation. But she
okay,
is ready to learn. She absolutely follow you. I just need to give her direction and she follows it. So your
okay,
area is never criteria though for selection. It's just your openness, your readiness to work, how easily you can gel up with your supervisor. As a supervisor, you never want anybody who can create a problem for you in future.
okay, okay,
In the
yes,
terms is, somebody is not listening to you. There are people who are staying in the campus and not ready to submit at all. It's
okay,
been 6 years. They have given the ultimatum. Also, ultimately, they have to leave the PhD. There are students who have submitted the thesis in our department after 7 years. So, blocking a seat for 7 years
okay,
is something which is not acceptable from a
yes,
supervision or
correct,
an administration point
yes,
of view. I think. So, there are
yes,
so many other things also that are judged when you are presenting your candidature as, or for the appointment as a PhD scholar as well.
okay,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, thank you. Because recently I appeared to one viva, and
Hmm.
the means whatever experience I got, I thought means is that the thing I am getting rejected or something like that.
No, no,
That
no,
is the
sir.
reason.
So
Okay.
area is never a limitation, because if the person who is sitting here for the selection purpose, okay,
Yes. Yes.
he might have some idea in his or her mind as well, that if the person will be
Yes.
selected, what area or what title or everything might be there in their mind, that what can be done with the scholar if he or she will join. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And while if you get admission also, you have 6 months to have a clear cut direction of your work as well.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. 6 months of coursework wherein you can decide the direction in consultation with the supervisor where you want to go. Okay.
Yeah, in that coursework period, we have to do these things.
Yes, the
Yes.
time period is given as a building, it's like a bridging the gap between where you are and where you can be. Okay. So
Yeah.
this is given that the person, especially if they are fresher, they're not aware of how the research work has to be done.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is how the thing goes.
Yeah. Means you have given good suggestions. I will take it accordingly in my future
Yes.
days.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Dear participants, any other queries?
Okay, I don't think there are people have any more questions. Otherwise, you may get my email ID from the madam, and in case in future also you face any problem, you can always write to me.
I think there are no queries, ma'am. Shall we wind up now?
Yes, please. Thank you.
On behalf of IoT Academy, we thank Dr. Neha Seth, ma'am, for the informative, enlightening, and enriching session. And we thank you once again for the excellent presentation, ma'am. And we thank you for enhancing our knowledge with the commendable presentation. We thank you very much for your efforts, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the listeners. Thank you for IoT Academy. Hope to see you all very soon again. Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am. You're always welcome, ma'am. It was an amazing session. Thank you, ma'am. I thank all the participants for joining the session today. Kindly submit the feedback form using the link that will be posted in the chat box. Thank you all. Have a great day. Please submit the feedback form using the link that has been posted in the chat box. Thank you all.